me start by introducing our panelists. It's Alison Anshaw. Thank you for being with us. She's the Managing Director and Chief Commercial Officer of the MENAT region in the Global Banking and HSBC. And Erdem Bey is with us. He's the Global Director in SAP in the Purpose and Sustainability Marketing branch. And Katsia Klatsinska-Lewis is a partner and head of EY Center for Climate Policy in Ernst& Young. So we have the finance, technology, and consulting. These three sectors are helping the world to transform, and they are contributing a lot to the COP agenda. So let us start the first round as soon as possible. And my first question to set the floor is going to be to Alison. Alison, can you just elaborate a little bit about what kind of initiatives are you involved at global level, and how you are scaling them up in other countries so that your global footprint increases?
Sure. Thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me today. It's a pleasure to be here. So as a global bank, we have a few key strategic objectives that we really focus on. And these can be divided into three main categories. So we have mobilizing finance for climate, supporting our clients in the net zero transition, and building the new economy. These are the sort of three pillars that I can really articulate around our strategy from a sustainability perspective. So I'll take them each by turn. Mobilizing climate finance and blended finance. I think there's been a lot of discussion at this COP around this pillar, and Dr. Sultan was very keen on mobilizing private capital, and that's something we've seen come up a lot at this COP. So we really want to leverage our international connectivity and convene stakeholders and act as a catalyst to our clients and secure new outcomes and strengthen initiatives. It's anticipated that $2 trillion will be needed yearly until 2030 in emerging markets and developing economies. So it's absolutely critical that both public and private come together. And I think it's particularly in the emerging markets where there's challenge around finding investment because of the macro economic background often in those markets. So it's absolutely critical that we have that public and private capital come together. We've tried to explore this in a number of ways. We're the founding members of the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, which helps establish cross-industry standards. We're also a member of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, and we also have a strong track record of being involved in a number of partnerships to really bring together public and private capital. We have a blended finance vehicle called Pentagreen, which is there to accelerate funding of sustainable infrastructure projects in Southeast Asia. They recently announced one of their first financings in the Philippines. And we also work with governments globally to support just energy transition partnerships. So there's JETPs, you may have heard of those in Indonesia and Vietnam. And we also look to finance sort of new technologies through things like our Breakthrough Energy Partnership. So these are ways that we work with partners to really try and mobilize capital and get it to the right places. In terms of supporting our clients in the net zero, we really want to support our clients diversify and decarbonize. So we're looking to work with them on their sustainability strategies. We've recently just done something called a Sustainability Business Accelerator, where we had a number of our clients sign up to a 6-month program, and at the end of that program, they had a sustainability strategy. So we're really looking to support them and guide them, and to your point, have best practices and learnings across our client base, because our client base is very broad, all the way from public sector down to small and medium enterprises. And finally, building the new economy is something we're very focused on. We've recently launched in HSBC Innovation Banking. We've put $1 billion of funding aside to really finance these new technologies. And I think another theme that's come out of COP is really how this new technology needs to be scaled to really make a mark and really help the transition to net zero. So that's these are our main key areas, and we look to have this as a global strategy. So whether we're based in the Middle East or in Asia, Europe, the Americas, our strategy is very similar across the globe.
Thank you very much for giving insight about what is there, and the access to finance and utilizing the financing tools to create the biggest impact has always been a problem. And it's good that the finance sector is trying to optimize what is at hand and trying to make the biggest impact, the largest impact of this fund. If we just move to the technology aspect of it, in SAP, it's a key partner of most of our members in transformation in any area. So we would really like to hear your insights about what is going on, how you position SAP in this agenda, and what are happening in your aspect, and what are best practices.
Sure. Thank you very much, Sarkan, and thanks, Yaset, for this opportunity. I mean, as corporate world, we really like 3 pillars, and we also have a 3-pillar strategy. And our first pillar is treating carbon like money. For centuries, we calculate in the most granular possible level. But for carbon, we speak usually about tons, gigatons, which doesn't help to us to understand the story. We need to understand the story in the possible micro level, in the most granular level. Each and every action of a corporate should be calculated in terms of impact into the environment. If you are a manufacturing company, you should be knowing that each and every step your factors of carbon. If you are a service company, what is your um, per minute carbon impact into the environment? Because this will be helpful to you to understand the real problem, and it will take you to the real solution. The second one is the collaborating across the supply chains. I mean, everyone is committed to net zero, but usually this net zero or carbon neutral targets are for scope 1 and 2, which is quite easy to observe and maintain within your own operations. But I mean, we are living in a global world, we are living in a network world, and if we are going to go to a real net zero targets, we need to collaborate across the supply chain. And how we do is we need data transparency here. I mean, from I mean, as we say, sustainability team sport is a team sport. Then we need to act real as a team and open up the potential data collaboration models. As SAP, we already built a sustainability data exchange framework and the technology which helps all our customers to consolidate their data from various sources so that they're not limited to with their own data. If you don't collaborate with our supply chains, we just really make a kind of nice green game within our own boundaries. But if we want to change the planet, then we need to be really teaming up together. And third one is supporting local communities. I'm really happy that Turkey has started such an initiative here in the pavilion. We need to understand each and every geography, each and every country, and then support startups, support scale up, support communities, municipalities, whatever possible within technology so that they can be a part of this game. I mean, sustainability is really different from all other challenges that we have been faced globally because I mean, you can be at your best, but your neighbor and your competitor and your good friend and your bad friend needs to be at their best too. So it's really a team sport and technology and together with know-how and finance, of course, three main enablers of it. And I'll be happy to provide some more details about real use cases maybe in the upcoming rounds. Thank you.
Thank you very much for emphasizing that digital and green transformation are going hand in hand. So that is a major focus in digital transformation in Turkey also. But it all starts with freeing the data. And that is why all public policy makers are focusing on that aspect. And thank you for putting a focus on that's a teamwork that we need to be together in handling this one. And if we move to the next topic, it is the emission trading system and carbon pricing. So it has been a huge agenda item in Turkey, and we are expecting our climate law to be submitted to the Grand National Assembly for the approval. But again, now we are thinking about how would it be the best way to implement a carbon tax in Turkey. So based on your huge expertise on those areas, can you elaborate a little bit on this one? How the emission trading systems are evolving and how carbon taxes associated with those?
Yes, thank you. We just discussed it before the panel, how timely this topic is for Turkey, who announced, I think on December the 1st, publicly that you will be launching your emissions trading system, the pilot phase in 2025, hopefully. So I think Turkey is in such an interesting moment in time where the country is contemplating a number of measures. So primarily the emissions trading system, but from what I understand, there might be also carbon tax that would complement the emissions trading system because usually that system really effectively can only apply to the largest emitters. I think you were considering, or the threshold for the ETS is 500,000 tons, I think, to be included in the system. So it's a good practice to have carbon tax to complement emissions trading system for more distributed emission sources. And then again, this is such an interesting moment as Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement, which sets the foundation for carbon markets under the Paris Agreement, is now fully operational. There are still some technical guidelines being negotiated as we speak, as part of the mainstream of the COP28 negotiations, but we don't perceive them as really critical. They are nice to have. They will harmonize a lot of approaches of individual governments. But really, Article 6.2 is fully operational. So this might be also a good thing for Turkey to consider how they could benefit from this mechanism. And against all of this, we also have voluntary carbon markets, which I think Turkey should also consider its involvement as a provider of carbon credits or a buyer or have that is interesting at all, which for some countries that's actually the case. They prefer to go with compliance markets. So very, very interesting time. And also Turkey can benefit from all of the best practices of the EU, of California, of other systems that have emissions trading systems in place. So you really can benefit from these, like I said, lessons learned, but also pitfalls or maybe things that didn't quite work out. And in the EU ETS, there is a number of those, I would say, policy inefficiencies that have been addressed over the course of the system's evolution. So happy to continue this thread of discussion, very close to my heart, and from what I'm hearing, also very close to the objectives of the country at large.
Thank you very much. So the our neighbors are talking. So public institutions are really carrying out a very open deliberation mechanism in the preparation and establishment of the emission trading system. We expect the same pricing aspect of it and also the carbon taxation aspect of it. So if we go back to Alison, you also mentioned that your company is carrying out or following the same strategy globally. So the insights and perspective of the company does not differentiate among regions or countries. But we always see that some investment environments are more conducive to implementing best policies or spearheading policies. So if you would like to define the most conducive investment environment for any improvement in the green transformation, how would you define the characteristics of it, where you can work more freely and faster?
So I don't want to call out one country in particular, because I'll get in trouble with the other countries'
Sure.
favorites.
Just the characteristics.
But I think, and I think while our policy is global, we obviously have presence in many countries across the world, and we acknowledge that we need to kind of work closely with the local communities, and we do that in different ways throughout our local entities. In terms of where we've seen sort of things working better, I think to Cassie's point, I think it's important that we use best practice, and where we've seen positive examples of transition accelerating. So, for example, in the US with the Inflation Reduction Act, we've seen huge investment in green technology, and I think that's a great example of where governments can really act as a catalyst, and where regulatory frameworks and subsidies can really help. I think that now we're looking in the UAE, and I'm based here in the GCC in Dubai, they're obviously very keen to make sure that we accelerate. I think just this COP is a great example of showing that this country alone is somewhere where we can make things happen. But I think the regulatory framework is needed. I think at the moment there's lots of different policies, lots of different frameworks. I think our clients, they talk to us about which ones to adopt, across different client bases, which would be the best one. That's where we want to really help our customers with their strategies. So I think getting some cohesion across which frameworks, and I think the ISSB that's recently been announced will help that definitely. But where we've seen Europe advance, and also using examples of where it hasn't worked, is also we need to take advantage of that too, and see how we can implement better. But I do think we need frameworks and policies and subsidies, particularly in the new technology space. I think wind and solar gives a very good example of where we were 10, 15 years ago when it was very expensive. We see how subsidies have helped accelerate renewables, be the same in some of these other technologies, to really make sure that we're able to scale up. Hydrogen being a good example.
So actually, doing and implementing best policies is really related to how you make policies, and the best practices in policy making really applies to that.
I think it's important to try and keep them as simple as possible. I don't know what the other panelists think, but I think it's really to make change happen, we need people to come together, and I think the more layers there are around the ability to understand and implement into the strategies, and across the whole supply chain as well, because the ecosystem is so important.
Thank you, Alison. And Adam, if I may channel the same question to you, how can you observe the best conducive environment for change, like where you can operate faster and better?
I mean, again, maybe I'm not going to name a country. We operate with, almost all countries in the world, and I see a lot of innovative, out-of-the-box thinking examples there. But what we see as a pattern is, I mean, usually, yeah, policy and public-private partnership is helpful to drive the change, but at the end of the change, at the end of the day, change becomes with the social interest. If we somehow increase social awareness, regardless of the policy or not, then the startups, the innovators, the academy, the non-profits and businesses will find a way to develop. And we lived a similar version in the digital transformation in the last 20 or 30 years too. I mean, some countries develop really strong frameworks in terms of understanding and digesting digital transformation, but at the end of the day, it happens on the ground with the real innovators, with the real change makers. So I think we have a good opportunity in sustainability that we can trigger the same change pattern that we lived in digital transformation, which is if we can provide a good infrastructure, good social interest, and a high awareness about the society, enable startups, enable technology players, and collaborate all together, then we'll find really good ways to be productive in all over the world in all geographies. I can give a couple of examples because the sustainable transformation is not just an environmental or technological or infrastructure transformation. Ideally, it's a whole, including the social one. With a customer globally, we work is a pizza chain, Mod Pizza. Maybe you know it's quite popular in North America. And they wanted to sort out the waste problem. I mean, you can imagine in pizza chains, the packaging waste and the food waste and time waste is really something to be considering. And they wanted to solve the waste. They wanted to go to a zero waste path. What we did is we measured and we saw, they saw together with our technology is the waste is becoming higher if the employees are not happy to work in this branch. So they thought that they need to make employees happy first to sort out the waste change. And then they thought that, and usually we can observe that um, it's a kind of high stress industry to work in the pizza chain. You compete with time, you compete with a lot of competitors. So they thought that how we can make the employee satisfaction higher, then they hired some people who may not be able to work in other industries, maybe some people with some physical disabilities, people at the senior age, or people or the former prisoners. So these people who increase the employee satisfaction by being there also reduce the path to zero waste. So if you just get it to zero waste as a kind of technical problem to be solved by waste management problems, that makes a sense. But if you can combine it with the real human and social aspect, then you can go to the real solution. We have many examples similar to this. Financial and infrastructure all together, then it's the closest way to the solution.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing out the right way of making a global and widespread impact by capturing all aspects of the problem. And most of our members, since they are multinational companies, are actually changing their ecosystems by what they do in this field. And it starts from the company, and sometimes it translates into a grassroots movement. And when we check the COP28 agenda, we see that there's a focus on emission reductions throughout the value chain. So that is a good thing. And we've seen that anything we do good is trickling down to those companies that we are touching on a daily basis. So Katsia, what can you say about how we are improving on this one? What does it mean to change or improve the value chain?
So when we specifically focus on emissions, because obviously, as you have mentioned, there are many aspects around broader ESG sustainability topics that should be monitored and improved across the whole supply chains. But if we focus specifically on the emissions, I think we're at this very important and interesting junction in time where there is a lot of push from the policy side of things. And I think the most prominent example that I think is being referenced on almost every panel is the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is essentially like a carbon tariff that will be imposed on goods being selected goods being imported into the EU. And what this policy will then bring about is, first of all, that we will know what the footprint, so-called embedded emissions, so essentially carbon footprint of those goods imported into the EU is, which is the information we didn't have. So a lot of manufacturers around the world now for the first time have to ask themselves, what is the emission intensity of my production process? And the way the system is designed is that for the first couple years, it will be essentially a reporting obligation. But I think this is such a tremendous step forward. I work with clients who tell me we have never done this exercise. We don't even know where to start. The EU has provided methodologies for calculation of that of the emission intensity of those production processes. So that's very helpful. Um, so so this will be the first step to have the visibility of the emission intensity. And the next step, starting in 2026, will be to impose a price on those emissions. So this will be another really big, I think, momentum to towards the reduction of the emissions, because now the EU-based importers will essentially have to pay for the emissions embedded in the goods that they bring into the country. And this in turn will have another tremendous effect that already has its name. It's called CBAM effect. It's in connection with this adjustment that the EU policymakers have provided for, which essentially says if your exporting country has a domestic carbon price, that price paid in the exporting country can be deducted from the EU CBAM that would otherwise be paid to the EU authorities. So we're already seeing a really big interest coming from countries across the world who provide goods to the EU to set up their own domestic carbon pricing mechanisms. And from the, I would say, rationale and policy objectives, this is such an easy sell because the government says, well, you will be either paying to the EU or will impose carbon tax, which is pretty much a no-brainer. And then that money can be channeled into transformation, green transformation of the country's economy. So those three steps, having visibility of the emission intensity of global supply chains, then having to internalize the associated social cost of carbon, and then thirdly, having the spillover effect of global climate policies. Very, very fascinating things to watch. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. In the opening webinar of this COP28 session, we met with one of the major think tanks of Turkey, and their CEO was there. And we talked about whether these environmental policies are also, that's for sure, but can be perceived as part of industrial policies. And then how should we position our countries accordingly? And once you mentioned the Inflation Reduction and the CBAM, so they have two aspects that the countries need to cope with, and it's also impacting business in addition to the incentive system of the countries, and also emission trading system that can be conducive about how they adapt to these systems and how the paid taxes can stay in the country for the future and use of the country. So that's the big debate. Thank you for pointing this out. And if we just move to the final round, Alison, can you point out or can you encourage people on both companies and countries for focusing on sustainable investments based on all the opportunities that your sector is bringing in? How can we just encourage them more, and what are the do's and don'ts for the future?
I think it's all about sort of working together as much as possible. And I think 2-3 years ago, even that recently, people just, it was a nice to have, a tick box. I think it was very much kind of sustainability, ESG, it was kind of at the fringes. I very much now feel with companies that it's front and center, and we're seeing in a lot of our clients now, the CFO is actually managing, or is the CSO as well, or they have a sustainability team that works very closely with the financing team. And I think in the past it wasn't that like that, so I think that's a huge step change. I think there's much more value around. It's not just sort of about paper cups, which are obviously very important, but it's gone much beyond that. And I think capacity building within companies, within the financing sector as well, is really important to make sure that people upskill, they understand, what's available to them. In terms of opportunities for sustainable financing, I think it's just a really important aspect of any financing team to really think about building that ESG capability into their sort of way of thinking. It is a mindset shift, but I think it's one that's come swiftly now, and there's lots of ways to do that. The supply chain features and our trade finance offers opportunities, for example, and solutions all the way to green bonds. I think before we've talked a lot about green bonds, green loans, but actually the product suite's much broader than that these days. So I would encourage clients to speak to their banking partners around what's available to them.
Okay. So once we were just trying to map all the resources that are available to the companies, but now we are focused more on how to access them and how to make the best of it. So your expertise and guidance is really appreciated on this area as a finance sector and as a distinguished member. So there are many follow-up questions that we are going to bring to you but in the future. So for the sake of using the time efficiently, and Adam, can you just point out one point of action for the people who are listening to us that can be the create the initial impact or increase the interest of all parties to these sustainable practices?
Yeah, I mean, I started my words saying that we love triple triangles in the corporate world. So I should be putting another triangle, which is record, report, and act. And the record, we should be recording each and every transactions as we record each and every financial transactions to the environmental impact, especially for the carbon emission, in the most granular way. Recording is good, but reporting is better. After you get all the records in detail, you need to have some using the capabilities of generative AI and the modern technologies. You should be converting it to understandable and actionable reports, especially implementing into the company strategy. And if we are talking about especially the private sector, then the action is getting these records and reports, and implementing is probably starting from the board level, putting the sustainability KPIs into the board members and making a kind of company target with these insights that you gather. So I would finish with record, report, and let's act all together.
Thank you very much. And that is so important, especially the recording is a must, but for the reporting aspect, most of our members are having disputes about what kind of reporting they should do in line with their targets also. So should it be SDG reporting, impact reporting, ESG reporting? So that is an area also that we are trying to discover what best way of reporting coincides with the company's priorities and targets. So that's an area that we would like to put more effect, more interest for the future. So we'll be in touch for that one also.
Thank you very much.
And for the last question, Katya, you mentioned in your question, in your answers, that many countries are also tackling with establishing these emission trading systems and carbon pricing mechanism and carbon taxation. So what are the insights that you can provide for the people who are tackling with this right now about the future of these implementations? What are they evolving into? And maybe if you can just point out some risks that people should be careful about, that would be really for the better benefit of everyone listening.
So when it comes to, I would say, strategic direction of travel for global crisis, I would definitely at some point, I would like to see some convergence. But I'm afraid things will just get more complicated before they become easier. Because right now we have, which I mentioned at the beginning, different sets of or different forms of carbon pricing, whether these are the compliance mechanisms regulating voluntary carbon trading. So we have different market segments, and then this is spread around the countries, of the world. So even when you look at one country, for instance, like let's take example of Mexico. Mexico has both emissions trading system and it has carbon tax, and this again comes in the form of federal measure and then state. So we really had actually I spoke to a person from the Mexican delegation, and they said that Mexico has the largest number of carbon pricing instruments of any country in the world coexisting at the same time. and they also will be implementing Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement. So even looking at an individual country, you can have this maze of different ways of pricing carbon. And so for companies operating globally, like this really is, um, you know, mind-boggling, and they really have hard time to grapple with all of these different frameworks that coexist. And one of the most common asks we are getting as consultants is, can you help us map all that's going on and then keep track of all of the developments? So now definitely Turkey will be very much on the radar also, what's happening there. And then obviously the systems also are evolving. It's not that we have one system and it's there to stay in its original form. The EU ETS, as you know, it is already implicit in the design from the outset that it's operating in phases. So from the beginning, we are acknowledging that the system will be evolving because there will be pitfalls, there will be unintended policy outcomes. So there are those set intervals at which EU policymakers come together and they revisit the EU emissions trading system directive. Right now, we are in phase 4. The first phase was actually called learning by doing because it was fully acknowledged that those first couple years will be just the system won't even be delivering what it's supposed to. This will be just to test it out. So I think, and I think this is what Turkey is also contemplating, right? Have couple first 2 years running as a pilot phase. So I think one theme is convergence of global carbon markets. I would really want to see that. And then second is even looking at the individual country from the individual country perspective, we know that we will need to cover a lot of ground before we reach an optimal system. So yes, I think these are the two main themes I wanted to share: convergence and evolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that one. So actually, in the constraints of the global economy, where we were really experiencing a tough time for all countries, the inflation, the growth figures, and bouncing back after COVID. So it was really tough for the policymakers and for economies. And green agenda was something like a positive agenda that everyone can handle and tackle with ease, and actually put on higher agenda items in their global agendas. But when we move to the implementation, we really saw there might be some discrepancies and differentiations, just like you stated. So there is a risk that we can be diverted from our targets while we are trying to handle them, so that they would also create the best impact to the economy. So that's a really important point. And how these things evolve is maybe going to be a major concern for everyone who are tackling it right now. Thank you very much for bringing this. So it was, as always, such an informative panel. Thank you very much for our colleagues from HSBC, Alison, SAP, Erdem, and EY Katsia. We will be continuing this series up to the point of transforming and disseminating the use cases so that anyone and everyone can benefit from, including all our ecosystems and anyone we touch. So thank you very much for your insights, and we will be in touch with you for the future of this series. Thanks a lot. And also major thanks goes to our institutions who are hosting us today, Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change, and the Presidency of the Climate Change. We are really curious about the climate law and the carbon tax work that we are going to contribute a lot should we be allowed to participate in. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.